Welcome everybody to the Saturday Night Bee Chat. Don is here, and tonight he wants to talk about some wax making in cold weather. He says he got cold weather down there in the south. So without any more to ado, here's Don.
Okay, as everybody probably knows, I make my own wax foundation. So I brought two sheets up, and you can see I run small cell. And this, people say you can't do your own wax and have a professional job. I'm going to get in close enough to where you can see it.
Come in a little more, Don. You
Get
got
the
to hold her steady there.
better angle. Get the
Yeah,
light up. Can you
there you
see
go.
the
Wait,
cell?
stop. You were good. Right there, right there.
There's the cells. Now this wax is a lemon yellow, mostly caps. Now people say you can't use old foundation. Now I'm going to slide dirty foundation next to it and you can get a comparison. Can you see the color change there, or the color differential?
It also is more wrinkly, Don. It's got pockets in it, and you know what I
Yeah, I
mean,
think it's
bubbles.
the way the light is catching it,
Is
maybe.
it okay? The one behind it looks super smooth.
Yeah, this is the one I try to run, and wax is usually rated sheets to the pound. And your bee supply house is running 7 to 8 or 8.5 sheets to the pound on deep. And this one here that I just showed you, I'm running 5, maybe 6 sheets. And if you was to feel it, you would think it was plastic. And the lighter your wax, the better off you are. Here's a block, and I you can see it good enough here.
That's good,
This
right about there.
that is from it's a 5-gallon bucket, and it's only about, I would say, not quite 2.5 inches thick. Now, the cheapest that anybody should sell their wax that's in this condition, with no chemicals in it, I would say $10, $15 a pound. That would be minimum. I
How
get
much is
20
that?
to
How many
25.
pounds is that?
This here is probably about 4.5 pounds.
So you're looking at about 45 or $50 right there.
Well, at $20 a pound, it's close to
$20 a pound. You're looking at
yeah.
eight at 90, yeah, or 100, yeah.
I sell very little wax. A person has to come here and about twist my arm off. And this wax here is basically, I use it for foundation, but people who's making cosmetics, this is what they want. Uh, no chemical. And if you go from one coast to the next coast, United States, you're not going to find very little chemical free, no chemicals embedded in the wax. And that's the problem that all the bee supply houses have. And that's one of the main reasons that I have started to roll my own wax. And I am actually now, I sell wax mills to people that want to learn. And even if you don't buy it from me, there's no instructions with these wax mills. I've already taught probably 4 or 5 people from other states that bought wax mills and couldn't figure them out. So that's the main reason that when I sell this wax mill to a person, they run that wax mill here and make good sheets. And when they're satisfied, they take it home. I won't get calls back and saying that wax mill don't work and don't do this and don't do that. They're going to experiment and run it well here. And Jimmy has posted something here about cane sugar. Cane sugar, yes, we use cane sugar by the 55-gallon barrel. And when we're feeding up nukes to get ready in the spring, we go through 1 to 3 barrels a week. And there's between 450 and 550 pounds to the barrel. And it's actually number 2 sugar. Sometimes it's fairly clean. Sometimes it might have ear plugs or welding rods, nuts, bolts, dirt. But the bees, they don't care. And as far as sugar, you can use beet sugar. You can use granulated sugar, powdered sugar. It has a little bit more cornstarch in it. It's more milky, but it's all sugar, and the bees are going to use it. I don't like to use corn syrup because the GMO, and you can't make good queens with corn syrup. I don't care what anybody will tell you. I've tried both ways, and sugar costs you a little bit more, but you make a better queen. And bees have to eat. And Ed wants to know if beet sugar is bad for bees. No, beet sugar, I've fed beet sugar in the past, and you have to compare prices. If you can get beet sugar for 8 to 10 cents a pound, you're going to go with what you can get the cheapest.
So Don, to back up a little bit, I did hear from a beekeeper, a guy who got a real good deal on used, or not used, but expired candy canes around Christmas. You get this candy. He crushed it all up and turned it into sugar water, and the bees ate it right up, and it turned his honey blood red. So the only the only thing I would avoid is anything that's got food coloring in it, right? Any kind of
Well,
used sugar.
actually, it's not going to hurt the bees. We had a candy cane company in South Georgia. It used to sell broken up candy canes and sugar candy, and it was peppermint or spearmint. And basically, if you took sugar water and mixed essence of oil in it, you got the same thing. The only drawback is a lot of it was in cellophane wrappers, and you got to bust it, break it, or hope that the water, gets it out. But for $25 a ton, I mean, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, and if you're not selling honey, you don't care if some food coloring gets in it. You could care less, probably.
Well, people say, I don't want to eat honey that had sugar fed to it. But, I've done a video on YouTube, and I was showing people you can tell when the honey flow starts and when it stops. You can put a little bear out there or a ketchup container with a pointed thing, put your honey in it, and put you a line across your landing board. The bees, if there's no honey flow, they'll line up and they'll just keep eating it. But as soon as the honey flow starts, they'll just drag themselves through it, fly out, and get nectar. So that tells me on a honey flow, they're
Oh,
not
that's a
going to
really
take
good idea.
it. So there's a lot of misbeliefs or misnomers out there that people they say has really no truth to it. Now, Jim is from Texas, and maybe he can jump in there and tell you about bees. You can get bees. That's what he's doing. He's getting bees, queens, nukes, and he's taking them back to Texas because they're gentle and there's a good markup in it.
Let me
You
let
want?
me open up let me open up the communication so he can talk. Hold on, Don.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
Okay, all you guys got to do if you want to talk is just right mouse click your little microphone icon and unmute yourself. Well, let's go back a second to the honeybee thing where you took the sugar bear, the kind of commercial you get it off the shelf looking
Right.
and you can buy the little ketchup top bottle and just draw a line. I just want to visualize this. Draw a line across the landing board out towards the front somewhere. And
Right on the front of the hive, on the landing
right on
board.
the front. Okay. And then if the bees eat that, there's no honey flow on. But if they just blow right over it, they're getting nectar. And I would like to explain that chemically speaking, nectar is a form of sugar, just like sugar cane is too. I looked at it, and the bees break it from a disaccharide into a monosaccharide, which is what becomes honey. But I understand people don't want to take sugar and just turn it into, but again, like you said, Don says all the time that sugar is supplemental feeding. It is not intended to replace nectar and honey and everything else. It's just there to help them grow. Right, Don?
That's all it is. If you get a package or if you buy a nuke and if you put it in your hive, you're going to have to add extra frames with new foundation unless you've got drawed comb. So they have to have something to stimulate those wax glands.
Mm-hmm.
And they will actually make wax more on new foundation than that they do on old stuff. So people say old wax is like gold, is a bunch of hot air. Sit in front of a hive in an afternoon and watch. If you got your frames in there are all drawn out every so often you're going to see, it looks like white dandruff coming out of the front of that hive. Bees are making wax platelets on their abdomens all the time. So if they're not using it and building comb, they're going to discard it and it's going to hit the bottom board. They're going to blow it out.
Right. Okay. So one more question about the wax mill. Now I know those are not cheap, but if you're going to get serious about producing your own bees and packages and queens, or even just doing honey, you're going to have some kind of way to draw this stuff out. What is what is the price on that? And then do you, if we come and pick it up from you, you'll walk us through it? Is that how you do it?
If you come here, what you're going to do is you're going to run and operate. We got a dipping tank and we got a wax tank. You're going to learn to run the temperature of your wax, the temperature of your cooling water, and run sheets through. You can adjust the wax mill to run 5, 6 sheets to the pound. You can crank it down to where you can run 22 sheets to the pound. You can see through it. So you can use it for cut comb. And, I always try to keep at least 3 or 4 wax mills here at all times. If you buy a wax mill from someone else, you can bring it here. I'll teach you. I have a fee for charging you, but I teach you on the wax mill here when you buy the wax mill. And wax mills are $2,000 and they're $2,500. And I used to have one on my web page. It was $1,300 or $1,400, and it was basically the same as the $2,000 one, except the framework was steel and the rollers was they're white milky plastic, the same type plastic they make gears and stuff out of. But the average person walking in and they look at the wax mill that's plastic, the one that's metal, and they say, "Yeah, plastic world, I want a metal one," and they'll pay the extra. So I stopped selling them, and I sell the metal ones, and
Yeah.
you won't run them out.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they would ever break. But because they're a custom manufactured item, like you were mentioning to me earlier, you have a guy that makes them for you. They're not going to be cheap, but if you're going to get serious about drawing your own foundation and raising your own queens, or doing honey cuts like you were talking about earlier, I definitely am looking forward to getting one of those someday. But anyway, let's see.
The thing about your wax mill, too, though, is if you stop and look at your wax, that's the heart of the beehive. So if you go foundationless and you're feeding the bees a lot, they'll draw wax. But, if you're looking at the wax, if you're getting accumulation of wax, I can run on that machine down there 1,200 sheets a day. I'm not selling a lot of wax. I will sell a percentage to my students, and I sell it for $2 a sheet. So if you take and make 1,200 sheets a day, if you got some teenagers, or if you got your husband or your wife out there, you can put them down there in 4 or 5 hours a day. 1,200 sheets, that turns into 2,500. You pay for your wax mill. I've sold a wax mill to 2 ladies that actually bought foundation and hand rolled candles. And all they was doing is buying a beeswax foundation, buying the wicking, putting them on an angle and rolling them up, and they was selling pretty good. And they come up here and they paid for that thing in 90 days. And that's selling candles. So if you want to keep your bees healthy, look at the percentage of losses by getting that chemical out and redoing your wax and getting the drone comb out and putting good worker cells in. The wax mill pays for itself hundreds of times over. And Jim has actually got one and took it back to Texas. And I've got several other students that's come here and took the wax mills and are making them.
Is that Jim Murray from DreamWorks?
Yes.
Yeah, Jim, you can talk. Go ahead. You're unmuted.
Yep, the wax mill is worth its weight in gold. You can't clean contaminants out of wax. So if you're doing it yourself, you know exactly what you're getting.
Right. And again, guys, remember that Don is coming from the standpoint of a professional beekeeper. This is somebody who does this full time. And he's going to tell you how to do it full time. Now, if you're a part-time guy, you just want to, But it's good to know these things. It's good to know the direction that you can go into, and Don can help you with the little things too, like you know, the how do you get wax foundation? You just let the bees make their foundation, that kind of thing. So remember that everything here, though, is presented from the professional's standpoint, not from you know, the hobbyist. So although
Well,
there are some overlap.
I have several students that probably Jim is one of them. I got Mike from Kansas, and I've got 2 or 3 from up north. Have called me and want to take classes from me, and I tell them right on the phone, find you somebody local to teach you, because that's a long distance to come. I'm not the only beekeeper out there, but no one wants to take the time or take a person by the hand and lead them down the road to commercial beekeeping. I've made the mistakes. I've lost money. And right now I'm showing you not to lose money and how to be successful. And Jim had called me 4 or 5 different times, and I kept telling him, find you somebody local. And he still keeps coming over here, and he drives a long ways from Texas.
Well, it's worth its time and weight, Don. Let's face it. Okay, so let's see if we got some questions here. The cane sugar was answered. Les Byler says he doesn't seem to get much of a honey flow in western Missouri because his bees eat all the time. And I was wondering if you had a comment on that, Don. Maybe he's in a bad spot or something?
Well, if you're in an area where you're not getting enough moisture and you don't have enough blooms, you might have to supplement feed. There's a lot of things come in play. I mean, I've seen bees a quarter of a mile apart from one bee yard to another, and a person will say, my bees ain't doing nothing. And the other person says, my bees, I just filled a super up in less than a week and a half. So you got to get the details. The person that ain't making the honey, how much new foundation are they adding to that hive every week or every other week? Do they have a water source? There's a lot of little things come into play.
That's
I'm not going to take it if
ahead.
there's a flow coming on. I would feed them as an insurance policy.
Right. Les, there may be more going on in your hive than meets the eye, and maybe you need to take a look at it, because if all they want to do is sit around and eat the sugar, maybe there's some, like Don said, maybe there's some kind of critter bothering the hive, or, a disease, who knows? But that's not normal, right, Don? I mean, they should always go for the honey, right? Or the flow.
They should be working. If you got a queen in there that's not producing or something, you never know. You could be in a hive and you could bump a queen, or maybe the comb is starting to get contaminated. There's a lot of factors that I've had people come here and actually buy queens from me, and I get talking to them and they say, when's the last time you put new foundation in? And they say, my hive's doing fine. We put foundation in 10, 15 years ago, and it's not stretched out. The bees are still working. Well, it accumulates wax, chemical in there, and everything else. I run 3 years max on mine.
All righty. Well, Les, it sounds like you got a little bit more investigation going there. If you want to take some pictures, open up the hive real quick. I know it's getting cold here in November. I don't know where you're at, Les, Missouri, so maybe you can get away with it. And send them to Don, or send them to Don's beechat at gmail.com. I'll get them posted up here and share them with Don, and we'll take a look at them straight up, let you know what he thinks. Now, I have a question here, Don, about leaf cutter ants destroying a hive overnight. So it sounds like somebody's got an ant problem.
I've never seen that happen. I mean, I've got hives that's sitting over mounds of fire ants. Sometimes they'll climb up the box, but unless the hive gets real weak, the queen leaves and got wax moth in, then you're going to have fire ants clean it out for the protein matter. But no, there's a lot of things, in different areas, people have different critters too. I mean, I had a fellow that sent me an email. His hive was very gentle all along, and all of a sudden it just turned mean, and he thought it was a bunch of bees from hell. He found out, by talking to me, that he had some lizards up underneath it, and another hive, he had a skunk out there scratching the front of the hive. So little things will set the hives off.
Another thing I wanted to mention, Don, that I talked to a desert beekeeper, and he's got them typical big-headed desert. They look like they're from Africa. Like, just rip your face off kind of size hands, them big mandibles. And he puts just Vaseline. His railings are covered so the rain don't get down onto the pipe that goes to the ground. And he just puts a coating of Vaseline around that, or he even uses toilet ring wax, and the bees, it don't bother them, but the ants try to crawl up and they get stuck in it, and they can't get in. So that sound like a good idea to you, or no?
Well, I've had several people that's mentioned things similar to it. I mean, I have a fellow up North Georgia, up in the mountains, where they got a lot of bears, and they will get in fence and they'll tear up stuff. He actually built looks like a steel ladder out of 2-inch pipe, and it's 8 foot high, and he sets all of his hives up on top of it, and he greases the poles with regular wheel bearing grease, and he says don't have a problem. The only thing, it's inconvenient to work. I've had another fellow say that he's got poles, not poles, 4x4s on his stand, and he has coffee cans under each leg, and he keeps them half full of old motor oil, and then he takes a paintbrush and paints the legs with the motor oil, and he says he doesn't have a problem with the beetles. So there's a lot of people that improvise and come up with some good ideas. As long as you're not putting stuff in the hive and you're maintaining it, not a problem.
Right. And in Arizona, we don't get weeds like you do down in Missouri in the South, and up here, and you got to trim everything down all the time, because if there's a way to get on that ramp, the ants will find it. I know that much. They're crazy that way. Well, we've got a question from Ed. He says, I went to check dry sugar on my hive, and I saw this little red beetle. It wasn't a mite, but when I looked online, it looked like a flower grain beetle. Any ideas on what that might be, Don? That sounds like a honey beetle, doesn't it?
I don't know. He's up north there, so you could have some different things up there. I put dry sugar on mine the last 2 to 3 weeks, and actually, it was pretty cold. It was probably, I would say, 38. I went out. It was around noon. I was pulling some boxes up here and redoing stuff, and I was watching bees bringing pollen in. And I start walking around the yard. We still got some dandelions blooming and a few other little things. The asters got a little bit of color to them yet. So even cold nights and bees warm up, they're still bringing stuff in. And they're taking the dry sugar. I just been dumping a couple cups of dry sugar in the back of the hives, walking around and just dumping it in there. Open the hive top feeder up and dumping it in between the frames.
Right. You just do that. It's a quick motion. It doesn't break up the cluster, because Ed's second question is, how should I inspect my hives with temps like we are having? Now, he's in Pennsylvania, so he's probably seeing some real cold. He says, do I just wait till spring to restart the inspection? And if he's going to do that, why not just open up real quick and throw some sugar in and be done with it? That would work. Right?
I think I would do that, but I would let your eyes do more inspection. I would walk around the back of the hive. I would lift it up. If it's feel real light, then I'd put some more sugar on it. But then go to the front and look and see if you got bees coming out. If they're coming out and flying and they look normal and you don't have no streaking of the hive, there's no need to get in the hive and start busting stuff up.
Right. Other than to put it in as the feeder and be done with it.
I set the bucket of sugar on the hive next to the one I'm going to feed. And I take my hive tool and just gently break the seal where the hive top feeder sits. And I get my sugar ready. I open it up with the left hand, and I got the sugar in the right hand. I drop it in, I reach over, get another scoop, dump it in. And that whole motion is not more than 8 seconds at the very most. And wow. I only had 1 or 2 hives that had just 2 or 3 bees come out over the edge a little bit. But there's no need to get in there. If the bees are flying and they're acting normal, more than likely your queen is fine. If you get in there, you're going to cause more damage than you're going to. What are you going to do? I mean, if you don't have a queen in there, you're not going to find one. If they're still in there, they're healthy. They're good.
Right. And Les says that what he's hearing from you is that it's just as well to let the sugar fall down throughout the hive. And in other words, he's wasting time building a sugar board specifically, right?
Well, there's a lot of people like to do a lot of things that they don't need. You know, you stop and think about 2 to 500 hives, and then someone tells you they're heating their sugar up. We dump our sugar into a 55-gallon barrel with a motor and a paddle on it, and I've never used hot water all the time I've kept bees, and I feed tons of sugar. Cold water, let that thing run a little bit, it'll dissolve. But to me, making sugar boards, I think it's a lot faster to dump a couple cups of sugar in there. If your hive is really starving, I mean, I would put a piece of paper towel or a piece of newspaper and put 4 or 5 cups of sugar in there and just make a mound and close the hive. They'll come up, the moisture coming up off those bees will dampen that paper and they'll cut through it. They can smell that sugar. They'll come up.
Yep. Sounds good, Don. Sounds very practical. Okay, well, guys, it's about 7:30. I don't want to cut this thing up too quick. You got any more questions? You can just. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my time. I'm Central. I apologize for that. I did want to make an announcement really quick, guys. That we kind of got off on a really bad footing. I came down with colonitis, and I was in the hospital 6 days. I was out of work 12 days, and I barely could, tell you what my name was there for a while. So we kind of got some of you have had trouble getting the invoices on time and getting communication because I just didn't have the energy to do it. But I'm back now. I feel pretty good enough to do this. So, and the fact that we've got as many callers as we do today, it shows that we're picking back up. If you want to help spread the word, this is what we call student supported chat. It's not very much money. It really just kind of covers the cost of the chat and a little bit of Don's time. And you can come here and ask any question you want about bees one-on-one, and Don will give it to you, give you the answer. Now, if you want, you can unmute your microphone and ask a question or make a comment, whatever you want to do, and we'll keep on going here. Otherwise, I'll come up with something to ask Don because I've always got something to ask him. Oh, Joe, go ahead, man. You're good. Talk.
Yeah, I was trying to get the mic unmuted. First for you, Jeff. Are you keeping track of the money we sent in, and you'll send us a new invoice when it runs out?
Yes. And I have a little spreadsheet, and when people attend, I check off the week that they attended. And that's another thing that Don and I talked about. We all know that stuff happens. Like Don lost his internet connection about 2 weeks ago for a couple days or a few hours or whatever it was. He couldn't get on. So we had to cancel the chat. When that happens, we're not going to ding you for that. We're going to just flat out, it's a wash. Your week will roll to the next week. Your car breaks down. You got family. You got to go to a birthday party, something like that. Just let us know. Just send one off to Don's Bee Chat if you're concerned, and I will make sure that you don't get charged for it. Don's here to educate people, and so am I. And that means that we just want to make the ends meet. That's all. So this is a really good thing for everybody. Ed wants to know, Joe. Joe, are you done?
No, I got a question for Don.
Oh, go ahead.
Or an idea. I run 2 queen castles last year, and I built my queen castles bigger than yours, so I had a little more space in between the 2 frames for the 2 frames. And I've got fixed where I can feed each individual one with sugar water. Why can't I, in early spring, load each one of them 8 compartments up with a frame of brood or eggs, and they start making their own queens? And I'm thinking that I could do 2 splits a week, because it takes 28 days basically to get a queen from an egg to laying, and take 2 off each week and still have queens all year long, 2 splits a week. Am I thinking something wrong?
Well, if you're going to feed sugar water, you're going to have to be careful. That's one reason I done away with inside feeders where you put liquid in. You run the risk of killing queens and drowning queens. So what I would do if you're going to make queens is I would just put a frame of honey in there. Open honey is fine in a frame of brood.
Well, my feeder's on the outside. I'm feeding them from the outside just with a bottle, just like you would a regular entrance feeder.
Well, the only problem with that, your feeders they're made to hold vacuum, and when it gets down halfway, you're going to start losing vacuum, and they're going to start leaking, and you're going to have a bigger robbing problem because once the ground starts to get a bunch of sugar water in it, you're going to have bees from the other hives coming over, and your queen castle is not going to be as strong as your even 5-frame nukes or your 8-frame boxes. So you're going to start you a robbing problem.
Yeah. Well, I run them last year. I didn't have any problem, but I was just.
Well, if you got a honey flow, they're not going to rob. But if there's no honey flow, as soon as you got a weak hive in your bee yard, they're going to start robbing. Then it starts going through the bee yard just about like dominoes. One falls, then another, and you start weakening all the hives because you're going to get some kill off.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Joe, let us know what happens with that. If you want to experiment with it, we'd be happy to hear your results. Right, Don?
Right. The only thing I have to say when people they take some of my plans and they make them bigger or they alter them is you have to maintain bee space. And when you get too much bee space in there, you start getting a bunch of burr comb. And the burr comb is your worst enemy because when you go to pull that frame up, you're going to roll a queen or you're going to damage cells. If you got your queen castle when it's a little bit too wide, I would push your frames together and push them to one side and hope for the best there. You don't want a lot of spacing in between your frames.
Well, I built that one that you had, your plans, and.
Oh well, you should be. If it's according to plans, you should be good.
Yeah, it was just a little bit tight. When you get a lot of bees in there, it's hard to get them out.
It was a little bit tight.
Yeah.
Did you use that real thin paneling, or did you use a 1/4-inch sheeting there?
I used 1/8 inch.
You got to get that veneered stuff. It's real thin, and when you put that slot down there, you got plenty of room to move those frames in and out. You got to make your box 13 3/4 on the outside measurement.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't make them any wider or longer. I just made them a little bit wider for just give me a little more room just to move them frames around. It's pretty tight. May just been the way I built it, but I raised several queens in them last year. I just thought if I pull a queen out, she's been laying in there. They ought to go ahead and just make a new queen, right?
They'll make a new queen, but the queen castle works best if you got some nukes out there where, if you sold a queen or you pulled a queen out and then you have multiple queen cells out there. That way, if you run 4 or 5 of those queen castles, you cut one cell out and drop it in each section, you got 4 queens to the box. That's what we do up here. Jim was asking about dry feeding of the mega bee. They usually don't take that dry mega bee when it sits out unless there's not much. Springtime, you got pollen coming in from everything. And we got lots of pine trees here. We got clouds of yellow pollen. And right then is the best time. I've kind of got away from feeding mega bee altogether because we got enough pollen coming all the time. And the thing you have to think about when you're feeding pollen substitute of any kind is when you put too much pollen substitute out there, you're going to end up attracting a lot of beetles. And if you're making patties, that's just a feast for these beetles. And the patties, if you mix up that with your honey, I would say mix up the size of just a little bit bigger than a golf ball and flatten it down and stick it on the top bars. That way they consume it up in a day to a day and a half. If it stays in there 3 to 4 days, it's just going to attract more beetles and you'll never get rid of them.
Right, and Don, he also had a follow-up question about he's starting off nukes in the spring. Would it be a big advantage to start off with a frame of brood in those nukes also?
Oh, yeah. It's always best if you got a frame of brood to drop in there because if you got a package or if you got a nuke, you've got to stop and think. All the bees you're looking at, they got a certain time that they're going to die off. So if you drop a frame of brood that's starting to hatch, you got replacements right then. So your populations don't drop as drastic. Packages, they'll build up real quick, and then you'll have maybe a week to 2 weeks where it seems like they're just at a plateau. They're leveled off a little bit. But if you drop a frame in there, but you have to use what you got. And if you're setting up a lot of packages and you don't have frames of brood, then you got to use what you got.
Right. He explains, Jim Murray, the DreamWorks Bees, explains that he's got a lull, and now he's in Texas, because when he says February, I'm thinking 3 feet of snow on the ground. We have a lull from February fruit trees to March wildflowers, and that's when he thinks he should feed this mega bee, just to kind of keep things going.
Well, now, when we put packages in up here, the first few feedings that we do now, I take a cottage cheese container, which is probably a pound to a pound and a half, and I put one of those in a 55-gallon barrel of sugar water with my essence of oil. So I believe by mixing it in the sugar water, they consume it faster and you don't have the beetle problem. But if you don't have the pollen, you need to substitute it.
Right. It's all based on individual locations and situations.
Location.
Yeah, and like you said, don't feed too much. It's probably pretty tempting to slather a bunch of it on and just let them go at it for a week. But then that's when your beetle problem is going to get started. Right. And so like you said, about the size of a golf ball, a little bigger, flatten it out, lay it across the top bars, you're done.
I had a lady was posting something on my Facebook, the Fat Bee Man group. She had a bowl sitting on her deck out in the back, and she put some pollen substitute in there. And she's just a young beekeeper, just starting out, and she was amazed at the amount of bees coming there. And nobody had said anything to her. And I sent a little note there that this is not the time of the year. She's in probably middle Alabama. And if you're feeding pollen substitute, you're going to cause the queen to start laying so much, and the bees will end up starving themselves out. So let the nature, if you got less pollen coming in, the queen's going to slow down a little bit, and you're not going to starve your bees out as much, and it won't be eating as much honey. Pollen is good in the spring for buildup, not in the fall.
Right, and also you won't have to supplemental feed as much sugar because there won't be as many bees. Mm-hmm. So let's see. Anybody else got a question here?
Yeah, Donnie. What is your criteria for feeding sugar water in the spring, time-wise?
What do you mean when I start feeding?
Yeah, I mean, what do you use as a criteria? Temperature, or what do you use?
I start feeding bees usually in January if the weather's starting to be nice. If they're they're fine. I start feeding honey first, then by March or middle February, then we start putting real thick sugar water, a 2-to-1 or better. And we put the essence of oil in there, and it's like a brood builder. I mean, it puts them going. And when April comes here, we got lots of pollen coming in. We'll cut back on the sugar mixture a little bit, but we still put the sugar out there. Sugar makes bees, so I'm not really worried about, contaminating honey with sugar, because once the honey flow starts, when our privet starts in and the red maples are coming in, they're not going to take a whole lot of sugar water if you got a good flow on. But if you've got windy days, it's just like a lot of years, the poplar trees put out some nice big blooms, and then we either get a storm or high winds and knock that down. So everything, it depends on the weather and temperature, and you just got to play it by ear.
Yeah, what temperature usually start, or do you just wait till the bees start flying?
I watch my maple trees. When I see them budding up, I know we're going to start getting into them, so I start putting the feed to them.
Okay, the maple trees.
Right, that's what I use as my go-to.
Okay.
Because everything is going to be based on your bloom, and it varies from year to year.
Right. So you're just reading the natural signs of spring coming, Don, and then responding with
Right.
supplemental feed to get them up and running so that when it hits, they can really move. Jim mentions again that, and now it's interesting because he's out more towards the drier Southwest, like I'm going to be over in Phoenix or over in Arizona. And he says he has I have done dry feeding in the open by the bee feeders. He just puts it up and puts the dry feed there, and the beetles, there's no way the beetles can get at it. So, and apparently he's talking about a supplemental feed there, right, Jim?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's fun to watch them too, because they get in there and roll the little balls around, acting like they're Hercules.
Yeah, that must be something to see. Have any of you guys seen the video where Don, I guess his son came up with this long strip of irrigation ditch, the pre-made stuff, the tubing, and cut it in half, and then has a 55-gallon drum because he didn't like to mix the individual drums, so the smaller ones, and then bees are just all balled up in there all the way down the whole length of it. It was like 100 feet long or something, Don, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's a drain pipe that was cut in half. And then what's laying in the middle of it is drip irrigation. And there's a valve on the 55-gallon barrel, so we can turn it wide open, or we can turn it halfway to where the flow is regulated. And the thicker you make it, the slower it's going to run. So, even in the summertime on hot days, filling that thing up with water and makes a big difference. You got water there.
Yeah, that's a point I wanted to make. I think Les was making it is that Don was making it in regards to Les. Water really is super important. Like you said, Don, if the bees don't have water, they can't keep the hive cool. They can't do the evaporation. They can't condense the nectar into honey and all of that. So always have a great water source. Les, you didn't mention if you have a good water source or not. But that is one thing you could probably look at. There's something going on. If you're in Missouri, I would think Missouri's got more flowers and plants than any place, and definitely able to support honey flow. So something's not right, like Don said. Something's just not clicking somewhere. You got a queen problem or a water problem or something. I'd really like if you research that less and get back to us and let us know, because it's kind of a mystery for all of us. We can all learn from each other.
Well, the hive top feeder, actually, when you put water in it in the hot days, you're actually going to make anywhere from a gallon to a gallon and a half more honey. Because if you stop and think about it, all the bees going in and out of the hive, half of them are going to carry water back to the hive. But if you got water right there, even the young bees that don't fly, they can go up, they can get the water, they use it for cooling, they mix it with the pollen for bee feed for the young. And all the bees now are coming in and out of that hive, they're hauling nectar. They're not wasting time. Even if you had a drinking fountain 4 foot or a river 2 foot from the hive, they still have to fly to it. That's one advantage of having that hive top feeder full of water. Now, I've preached that for several years, and I've had people actually, they'll send me an email. They say, I've actually done it, and I've seen the difference. It does make a difference.
Well, it makes sense if you got to crawl up inside the hive a foot or two versus flying 100 feet or 20 feet or 30 feet. That does make a lot. And then like you said, they're going across, they're scraping their wings on everything, and and beating themselves to death trying to bring water in, and now they're free just to do nectar. So, I think that's a great idea, Don. Let's see.
There's a lot of things that I mention, and then people, they stop and they listen to it. That's one reason doing these chats. And people say, why didn't I think of that? That's so easy. The whole philosophy of my videos that I do is common sense beekeeping. If it don't make much common sense to you, then, you're spending money on something you don't need. And Jim's talking about salt blocks. He must have seen the salt blocks that I have out there. Bees, they still need salt to process their honey or to cure out their honey and that. So If you put salt blocks out, especially if you got a yard where you're selling honey from it or you're selling nukes, people come, it's hot outside, they start to sweat a little bit, and the bees land on them. And some of the people are used to wearing bee suits and they start to get all twitchy about it. But the bees are landing on you, and all they're doing is sucking salt off you. And if you put a salt block out, or even a couple of them, just regular white salt, you won't have that problem of bees landing on you. So there's a little tip right there that, it don't cost you nothing. Salt blocks are cheap.
Yep, I have a salt block for my horse, and I've also heard that horses don't like bees, so I'm going to set a salt block next to the hives so they don't got to go bug her for salt. And they just don't like being landed on. You ever see a horse shimmy and flick its tail and everything, trying to get the flies off of it?
You know why?
Yeah, well, I guess because they're afraid of getting stung.
Well, horses snort a lot, and they're like a dog. A dog's nose is wet, and they breathe through their mouth. Horses is basically the same. Their nose is always wet. And if the bee lands up around their nose and they snort it up and get it into their lung, you got a problem there. Most
Yeah,
of the time, unless the horse is really sweaty, the bees ain't going to be all over it.
right. But that's just a preventative measure, like you said. And it's obvious if they're taking salt, they must need salt,
Right.
so why not give them the supplement right then and there? So did you have another question?
Yeah, and when you start feeding the sugar water early in the spring, do you immediately start putting your brood builder in it?
I usually try to feed 3 or 4 rounds. First day in the spring, I try to get some tea tree oil in them. That's kind of a preventative instead of using that Fumidel B or Fumagellin. I like to use the tea tree oil mixed up into my sugar water because that's antifungal and antibacterial. And after I got at least a couple rounds through that, and I mean rounds, 55-gallon barrel filled up 2 or 3 different times, then I start building with my brood builder. And the more you put in it, I've done 2 different videos back to back on my bird bath. And when I made one adjustment on my brood builder, I had a lot of bees out there. But when I made a second adjustment on it, it was covered up twice as hard, and I mean, just adding just a few more drops made the biggest difference. So, yeah, I mean, it makes a big difference when you're putting a supplement to these bees. It's like people taking, supplement vitamins, they feel better.
Now, when I started feeding your brood builder formula in the high top feeders, I don't use smoke, but I had to start lighting a smoker to run the bees out because I'd have 30 bees get in the feeder trying to feed them.
Yeah.
I mean, they just
Ed
attack.
wants to know if it's table salt or kosher salt. Table salt, I don't know. Table salt contains iodine. Your salt block, I don't know if it contains iodine. Kosher salt, I don't know. I think you're just paying a little extra for the same salt. Just go down to the hardware store or your feed store and get some animal feed salt blocks. They come in 1 or 2 pound blocks, and they come in 50-pound blocks.
Right, they come mineralized too, but that's more. I have a mineralized one for my horse, and I'll notice birds will land on it and they'll lick it, and animals will come around, and bunnies and whatever, and which I don't really care because it's a 50-pound block, so it takes 2 years, 3 years to melt out there. But I just think straight white salt is what you're looking for. I don't know what iodine would do to a bee. Probably nothing, but it's meant for humans. That's iodine supplements meant for humans. Um, Back in the day when we didn't get enough iodine in our bodies, and you get real bad diseases. So yeah, just a vet supply store, Fleet Farm, whatever you got, hardware store, straight white salt should be more than sufficient, and it'll keep the bees off of you and your animals and everything else.
Well, the table salt, the only thing I would see about table salt would be, if you get dew on it or if you got a rain on it, it's gone. I put salt blocks out there, a 50-pound block, usually lasts 12 to 14 months. It depends when I put it out. If I put it out in springtime, by the time September gets around, the deers is already on it a lot, and they're chewing it and biting on it. I've actually done a video of my dog watching the deer out there under my apple tree with the salt block. So, but if you put it out there in the wintertime and you get a lot of rain on it, I think a salt block, a 50-pound block, will last a whole lot longer than table salt. One or two rains and it's just downing the ground.
Yeah, in Arizona, I don't have the problem with the rain, so my salt blocks go on forever. They go for years, literally. Jim mentioned that he's tried both, and sometimes they want one, sometimes they want the other. So it's like, again, they're really cheap, mineralized or not. But just to keep the bees off of people, if you've got customers coming to visit, you're trying to do something organic or sell honey direct, that kind of thing, I would think it'd be a good idea to have them out just to keep people from getting squeamish.
Well, do you think there would be enough interest to, try to do a video, get my wax and stuff going and show people the process of actually rolling sheets out from just plain old wax?
Well, Don, I do. But how we'd have to look at equipment and discuss how you're going to do that, because you're pretty much a one-man show down there.
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah, and you want a good quality output, but I know that I when I get going here with my bees, I'm going to have whatever the guy over in Wisconsin gives me for frames, and go from there. I still need to confirm with him that is he doing 5-frame deep nukes, what is he doing. But once I get it all figured out, I'm pretty much going to end up probably having to have the bees make their own wax, because I just don't have a source of decent wax. So I would think
the thing too is I would find you somebody close by and kind of look at different beehives and get an idea of what you're looking for. The biggest thing that I see that goes on is people go out and they buy a nuke and they don't even know what they're looking at. It's about as bad as going out and buying a car and you don't know what it's supposed to sound like or even know how to drive one. So,
right.
If you go out and you're looking at a nuke and the guy's got the queen in the cage, that should be a little alarm, a light should go off in your head. If I don't see a queen running in a nuke, and that means if the queen's running around, she's laying. If she's caged up, he could have caged a virgin queen or a queen from another hive and stuck it in there, and you go home and you release it, and then you lost your queen. You should know how much brood should be in a nuke, how much honey, how much pollen, the condition overall of what you're buying, condition of frames, wax. If you're buying a nuke and it's chocolate, black looking, you need to back away from it. So springtime, when we start getting into nukes, I think we should I've done some videos you can see on the different videos I've done, but to see what a nuke looks like when you go to buy one, whether you buy it from me or anybody, you should have an idea what it should look like before you buy it.
Jim mentions the word organic here, Don, and questionable wax. Here's the problem. The government got involved, USDA, FDA, in defining what organic was for farmers, and pretty much left the little guy in the dark and left him completely floundering. You got to have, if you're going to be a farmer and you wanted to do organic vegetables, it is insane the amount of paperwork, and you have to be certified and you have to go through all this crazy stuff. It really only makes sense if you got like 10,000 acres, or 5,000 acres. If you have 100 acres or 10 acres and you want to raise organic apples, you can't do it. You can't use the word organic. Now, I haven't looked into the bee word, the organic for bees, but I have heard from other beekeepers that if you claim your honey is organic, you must have control of a circle, a radius of 12 miles, and say that there's no pesticide in that. Otherwise, you can't use the word organic. So all wax, it's like Don says, you can't help with what your neighbor's going to do if they're going to put stuff on their roses or spray their fruit tree or something like that. You're going to get some stuff, and good maintenance on your wax is the way to keep it as clean as possible, right, Don?
Right. Well, the one thing that I would do is I would be advertising that you are organic. I would say I am chemical free. I put no chemicals in my bees. I use no chemicals, so they're therefore are not in the honey. But see, you cannot guarantee, even if you state my bees are strictly organic, my honey is organic. If you got a few of them bees that got over, like you say, in someone's garden and they've used 7 or they've used a fungicide on their fruit trees and they bring these trace chemicals back and get them into that hive, you got a problem then. So if you're saying you're chemical free, you don't add chemicals in any way. I mean, sugar is basically not a chemical if you want to look at it. Aspirin, I guess, is a chemical, but people put it in their body. So I would just reframe to say organic. I mean, I've had bees on organic farms, and it's you don't know what's people doing when you're not there.
Right, and Jim, if you've seen Don's wax making videos, he goes through a process where he gets all the impurities out by melting the wax and letting it settle by what do you call that? Differences in weight. You know, the wax will rise to the top and the gook will fall at the bottom, kind of thing. And he ends up with wax that, I mean, he was showing you. You got that block there again, Don?
Yeah, here's a block of wax. This is mostly cappings.
Now that's the front of the wax, the top of the wax, or the bottom of the wax?
This is a circle. See?
Right. Okay. So see
That's
that
the bottom.
now you see there's a little bit of gray stuff on the bottom there, Don. That's probably propolis and a little bit of
This
dirt.
here is a little bit of propolis. I mean,
Yeah.
I could tell you take this and put it through the melter again, and it would come up a few more shades light. And these are the 2 sheets of wax that we made. And one of these is nothing but cappings. Probably had a little bit of dark stuff in it. You can see the wax
Yeah, you
there.
can see the definition there. Yeah.
All right. Now I'm going to slide one that was made from all brood. And it was dark chocolate to dark chocolate, almost coffee color. Now you see the difference in it? You can see it's even actually since I worked it, it's come up a lot of shades since that dark stuff. When the process that I use in the large kettle and boiling it, by boiling it and getting a block and then reboiling it 2 to 3 times, each time you boil it, you get more cleansing of the wax, so you can come up several shades each time. That's why I've done these little videos, a little 3 and 4 minute videos, show you how to take a block of wax, how to take comb, how to clean it up. I'm trying to hit on a lot of subjects in a short period of time.
Well, Don, with the coffee colored wax, that wouldn't bother you to put it in your hive, or would you send that back through for another cleaning?
Well, I mean, if you look at it this way, a lot of people are looking for cosmetically perfect. If you take a person coming here that's looking for everything so perfect, and I have sheets that have specks in them of propolis, because I don't worry about taking it out. It's a natural product of the hive. And the sheets that are perfectly yellow, most women will grab them first. I don't know if they're using them for candles, they just look prettier. But the bees prefer a little bit of propolis in there. And if you get the propolis and keep stirring when you're making your sheets, it actually adds a little more strength to that wax. So, it's a product of the hive. I'm not looking for beautiful wax. I'm looking for good cell structure and worker cells.
Yeah, without any contaminants like
Right.
pollution or dirt or whatever, chemicals, that kind of thing. That's a good point. The wax you're raising bees on is one thing, and the wax you're selling for, cosmetic is completely different world, completely different idea.
Well, that's why I brought that circle up here. That wax there is basically cappings. And, the cappings is the wax itself is probably no more than a month to 6 weeks old. And when you extract it out and then put your frames back, then you've got a new batch coming in. So it's not old wax.
I see.
that don't
Okay.
have a chance to accumulate any pesticides in it.
No, and it doesn't get much propolis or dirt or anything like
Right.
that. So it's just very easy to work with. But
It's
again,
good
you're
for
working
lip
on a
balms and cosmetic uses.
right, and remember, guys, Don's working on a cosmetic. I mean, a industrial scale. He's got a full blown bee yard. And so, you're not going to get anywhere near the amount of wax that he's going to get with 5 hives or something like that. But it's all good to know, good directions that you can take and build your bee empire into. So, anybody else got a question? I think somebody was asking something there. Go ahead.
Hey, Joe or Don, would you put
Yeah.
that gray sheet in your hive, or would you refine that more before you done that?
Well, that's fine. I mean, I'd use it, no problem at all. The bees, they don't reject a whole lot. I mean, you could even take a flat sheet and put it in there. They will make it. If you stop and think about a tree, do they stop and buy foundation? Do they buy frames? They make nice straight comb in there. And as you was mentioned, I got a full blown bee yard here. There's a lot of people want to get into commercial beekeeping, and they want to start making a lot of nukes. They want to make a lot of queens. Well, there's nobody out there teaching them. So they want to come here, and the minute you put them out there and say, now, here's 2 rows here. You run these 2 rows and check the hives and see if there's queens or cells in there. And you know what the majority of the people start to tell you? I didn't realize it was so hard to do this. You can't look at 2 hives an hour. You got to look at 30, 40, or 50 an hour. You got to move and move fast and do it efficiently. So I'm probably the only one around that's going to give that person right off the street an actual feel, what it feels like to run a bee yard. And that's why my students are running these beehives, so they get the feel of it. How to catch queens. Steve was in here on the last chat, and him and his wife was a little slow, but now they're pretty speedy. They get in and out of them hives, and he started with just 4 or 5 nukes and some packages, and he's up over 100. So, and Jim, he's building up several hundred out there, and he's the same way. He's getting speed faster and faster.
When you melt your wax that you use in your hives in the bee yard, you typically just melt it twice to clean it up, or more times than that?
Well, typically it gets melted 3 times. The first time it comes out of combs, I get a small block and I stack all them blocks up. And then when I get about 8 or 10 of them, or about 12 inches high, then I start the second melt and I condense all them down, and that gets more dirt out and refines the wax more. The third time, they go into my wax dipping pot where I dip my sheets out of. And I'm always running 1 inch to 3 inches of wax in there. So the bottom ½ inch or 1/4 inch has got a lot of dirt sediment in it, and the water is underneath it. So once it hardens, I take that whole sheet, that whole block out, and then I'll remelt it and combine it into another wheel again. And the wheel I consider is like the one I showed you. That's a short wheel. We use a 5-gallon bucket, and we usually put about 7 to 8 inches in there. It'll run 8 to maybe 10 pounds, 9.5 pounds sometimes. And we'll put that block in there, and we make sheets out of it.
Jim mentions. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
I'm done.
Jim mentions that you could, if you want, and you got good connections. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have started out more projects with people, and they seem like they're going to be so nice. And then once there's a little bit of money involved, Don, you know how that is. It all falls apart. But if you got a good bee club that can buy the mill and then give it out to or schedule uses. I don't see any reason why that's a good idea, Jim. Have them buy the mill. Everybody puts up $100 or something like that. Buy the mill. Somebody learns how to run it and teaches everybody else. And like you said, they don't use a lot of resources and time because they're fighting the clock from day one. And they can concentrate on brood and honey. So that's not a bad idea.
Wish I had
There's
a
a
good
lot
club.
of avenues you can make money in bees. I mean, you can start out with a few hives, and pretty soon you find out you got a market for queens, then nukes, then wax. And then, if you're providing services, extracting for people, even students, they don't want to buy a wax extractor. I charge them $20 and they can bring all the frames they want and extract it out. I keep the wax, charge them $20, and that's basically for a cleanup of the extractor in the room back there and the use of a hot knife and the extractor. So it's very nominal.
Sounds like a good idea. Wish I could find me. Somebody was saying they wish they could find a bee club. I have the same problem up here in North Dakota. Don't nobody want to talk about it. They know what they're doing and they don't want to share.
Well, I think by getting on these chats, and there's going to be enough people from around the United States, and you can give your location, and if people want to come and join a club, you can start a club yourself. I mean, you basically can do it now, and once you get enough people that's interested, then you can give them a physical location.
Right, and we're just about ready to wrap up here, Don. But there was one question about, would you do a video chat appearance for a bee club? Like,
yeah, I do
like
them
this,
all the time. I do them usually on Skype.
Okay. So whoever asked that question, where should they just contact you over at your email address or what?
Yeah, they can send an email address, and usually the bee clubs, what I found that they do is they get a computer or a laptop, and they get a projector with a screen, and they'll project the whole meeting on the screen. And the people in the bee club who are interested in chatting, they all chip in. And the ones that don't want to chip in, they don't need to pay attention. But that gives the ones that chipped in, they can come up and they get 1 minute to 3 minutes, and they can ask their personal question and get a personal answer. So, most of the time, $150, $250 for, an hour chat. I mean, that's reasonable.
Yeah, I think that is. I like that idea, Don. As this grows, we're going to be able to form little chapters, 5, 10, 15, 20 people from. And I know the North Dakota produces more honey than any other state, but these guys, they're as tight-lipped as a, I don't know how to explain it. They won't even answer phone calls or emails. And so I'd like to get some folks up here and share knowledge and share mistakes and just, move on. And then eventually someday I'm going to relocate back to Arizona and I'll be ready to go, and I'll probably start me a bee club there too. But anybody else have any last question for Don? It's over. We're over the mark here, but that's okay. One more question, Don. Anybody? Doesn't look like it. I think you talked them all out, Don.
Well, I think a lot of times just to talk to someone, I think a lot of people feel intimidated. They shouldn't feel intimidated. If you got a question, if you think it's silly, ask it. I don't think there's any dumb questions, and don't be afraid to ask a question. That's what I'm basically here for, to help you down the road to be a successful beekeeper.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for coming by, and we will see you next Saturday.
Okay.
All right.
Everybody.
Bye-bye now.
See you next time.
Tell Monique and Cookie I said hi.
Okay, sure will.
God bless.